Hello there. Now, in Star Trek, there are many mysteries left unsolved. A lot of answers that have never been given to questions that sometimes weren't even posed, but they're kind of there in the background. And it's not something further looked into. Now, recently we covered the discussion over what exactly happened with the Equinox. How did it end up in the Delta Quadrant? Why was nobody looking for it? If it disappeared in the Badlands, why wasn't Janeway told? If it was taken somewhere else, it's understandable, but all the same, there is a lot of questions. Now, of course, when Voyager recontacts the Federation, they're able to tell the Federation the Equinox was destroyed, putting some closure to the story, but the fact remains there wasn't much effort, seemingly, put into it if it was a ship that disappeared. And then there was the question of why didn't the Caretaker send it back? So that got me to thinking, what else exactly did the Caretaker drudge from across the galaxy? Now, we have to start with some inductive reasoning. The Caretaker, of course, was trying to reproduce. He probably initially reached out to Suspiria, if not back to his own people, for whatever reason were like, no, just no. And he wasn't strong enough to do anything about that. He'll have clearly started with the local races. He might not have bothered with the Okampa, because he saw them as his children, but he certainly would have attempted reproduction with the Kazon. He might, maybe with the Vidians, even with the Phage, and then with the various other races, the Cretonan Guard, the Swarm, the Talaxians, and then sort of spiraling out from there. So he probably tried the local races before casting the net wider and spreading it across the galaxy. But who exactly else did he try this with? So we're going to do a quick breakdown today of who exactly the Caretaker dragged to the Delta Quadrant, and ask a couple of simple questions about them as well. Now, we learn, because Neelix, of course, was, before his tenure aboard Voyager, he worked as a scrap merchant. There was a large junkyard near to the Caretaker's array, somewhere in the Ocampan system, where old derelict spacecraft and other space junk was jettisoned routinely, probably by the Kazon and by others as just scrap they didn't need anymore, and it was just a convenient place to dump it in a system where no one could stop them. Neelix, however, as he pointed out, you'd be surprised at the things people throw away. There's stuff of value that they just couldn't be bothered to recycle. And Neelix was just there, a scavenger, earning an honest living, recycling all the spent and thrown out materials which you could find in this very extensive junkyard. But from this convenient little vantage point, he was able to see the Ocampan homeworld and the Caretaker's array. He was able to detect the ship recorded, should I say, at least on its sensors, 52 alien ships dragged to the Delta Quadrant. Now, although most of these ships are not named, and to my surprise, there actually isn't a breakdown list. I thought perhaps there would have been, but despite exhaustively searching, I did think it was mentioned more in Voyager, but upon a rewatch, I actually discovered it's not. It really isn't mentioned too much. There's only a handful of ships we can canonically confirm the Caretaker definitely dragged. We know he was taking ships from the Badlands, but we know he was taking them across the galaxy. So there's likely a lot of ships from races we simply have never heard of. But because he was taken from the Badlands, there are some we did hear about and we did know that he took. So with that out of the way, with that little detail, that little caveat, to bear in mind, we don't know what all 52 ships were, and for that matter, those are the 52 ships that Neelix noticed. Neelix, of course, was a scrap merchant. He must have been selling his wares somewhere, so he likely wasn't spending all of his time there. He would likely come back to the scrap yard and excavate what he could, and then fill his ship with as much as he could, and then go to market somewhere, and he was selling it. So these 52 ships are the vessels he detected. There could have been 10 times that number. Just to bear that in mind. We have to assume he didn't see every ship. The Caretaker was doing this, after all, for nearly 2 years at least, that we know of, that he was bringing ships. So, what do we know? Off the bat, USS Voyager. Of course, we know that the USS Voyager, an Intrepid-class starship, was dragged. We also know that a Maquis Raider was taken. Canonically, we also know a Cardassian Galler-class vessel was brought. Possibly even the same one that was pursuing Chakotay. It would make a degree of sense, as that one was in the area generally. It was the main patrol ship. We know this from Deep Space Nine and other sources. The gull of that ship often interacted with Captain Sisko, Gul Dukat, and others So we know that that ship was generally in that area, but it could easily be in another Cardassian vessel. We simply don't have that specific piece of information, and we don't know what happened to it, but it does imply that the Cardassians knew about the Caretaker. Because if that ship was sent back, and we know that it was, because in dialogue, Neelix's ship records it being sent away, disappearing, that means, assuming it wasn't destroyed when it arrived by being thrown into the Badlands and hitting a plasma storm, which it might have been, they would have reported everything that they knew to the Cardassian High Command, which meant the Cardassians knew about the Caretaker, the Dominion knew about the Caretaker, the Breen would probably have known about the Caretaker. And considering how good at intelligence gathering Section 31 were, they probably knew about the Caretaker. Hell, Maquis had decent enough spies, they might have known. So, if it wasn't Gulliver, it was likely another ship that, if it wasn't destroyed, would have reported that information. Just the thing to think about. Another Cardassian ship was also taken, although not technically a ship, it depends on your point of view. That was the Dreadnought missile, basically a warp-capable ICBM, although ICBM would not be an accurate thing, but it's the modernized version. It was a warp-capable matter-antimatter warhead with shields and disruptors to defend it. And it was malfunctioning, but for whatever reason, the Caretaker didn't bother to send it back. My guess would be, because unlike the Cardassian ship and other vessels that he initially pulled and sent back, this was an unmanned craft. He would have seen it either as some kind of probe or as a weapon, and he simply didn't care about it, and he just let it go, and it went off on its merry way. And we, of course, have the USS Equinox, another Federation starship. And that actually, canonically, surprisingly, brings us to the end of the list. We don't know what the other vessels were. We know that he brought 52 ships. We don't know if that includes Voyager and the Equinox, incidentally. Also, the fact that Neelix's ship didn't actually detect the Equinox, thinking of it, would indicate very strongly that he wasn't present for the arrival of all the different ships, because he clearly didn't see the Equinox because it wasn't recorded in his sensor logs. However, we do see a screen when 7 of 9 is analyzing the sensor logs from Neelix's little ship and all of the vessels it recorded, and that's where she identifies a Cardassian vessel. Now, there are several little squares on the screen that I have tried to scrutinize. Some of them, a couple of them are of planets, a couple of them are of spatial grids, but a couple of them are vessels. Now, one of them, after I've studied it, it's kind of a distorted fuzzy orange blob that to me actually looks like Voyager in silhouette. Just they've removed any detailing and they've fuzzed the image a little bit and made it orange, but it basically looks like a sensor scan of an Intrepid class starship at a sort of 3/4 angle. I can't be certain, but so I'm assuming that's actually Voyager. But then, interestingly, down in one of the others, there is a Peregrine class fighter schematic up, which is interesting, but it does, to me, imply that perhaps a Peregrine class vessel was also taken. That could imply another Maquis ship. In fact, very likely it would, as the Maquis will operate in that particular class of fighter. Or possibly another Federation ship also was taken. It could also, as Peregrine vessels were Federation ships, not just Maquis, despite what people might think, because they were, of course, used by Starfleet during the Dominion War. It could have been taken from somewhere else, maybe the same place as the Equinox. Maybe it was actually a ship that was looking for it. Who knows? It's hard to say. It's also hard to say if a Peregrine class was. This is more something to me that's perhaps a little implied by it being up on the screen. But apparently no one batted an eye at the idea that a Peregrine class vessel was there, or there was perhaps nothing they could do about it by this point, as they were already thousands of light years away. So this took me to beta canon sources. I had a look and a deep dive to try and find if there were any references to any other ships in books or other media, and I couldn't really find any. I found one reference which was interesting to an abandoned storyline idea, so consider this as beta canon as you can get. There was an abandoned story idea. Also, incidentally, I can only find one reference to this story at all. It was an abandoned concept for an episode in a later season, season 6, season 7 perhaps, which someone references, and they mentioned that they get the information, it's on Reddit, and they reference a website that no longer exists that apparently claimed this was an episode. And the concept was kind of similar to the Equinox, which I believe is the reason that if this episode was ever considered, is the reason it was abandoned. But instead of encountering another Federation ship, they were going to encounter another Maquis ship and get into conflict with it. Somehow a Maquis vessel had managed to get just as far. I think suspension of disbelief that a Maquis ship could have got that far, as well as the similarities to the storyline with the Equinox. I think if this episode was real, was the reason it was abandoned. Apparently, the ship was going to be called the Lynx, and it was going to be another Maquis ship of some kind. I would assume another raider, but it's hard to say. If it got that far, it's conceivable that perhaps they were going to go with it being a larger vessel that the Maquis operated, but which would probably mean some kind of transport, to be honest, as the raiders were pretty much the biggest combat vessel they had. But that is literally everything I can find. If you know any others, I'd be really fascinated to hear about it and where the sources are from, because if it's my book or something, I'd like to know, because I simply couldn't find anything. I genuinely thought, setting off to make this, there's going to be more. But shockingly, there's not. And, I mean, obviously, it's it's an interesting aside of what would have happened if the Caretaker wasn't sending all those other ships back, if there'd been this whole Alpha Quadrant contingent of starships, as well as mixing with the Delta Quadrant, and perhaps Beta and Gamma Quadrant vessels as well, the Caretaker have been dragging. So you got Klingon, Romulan, Ferengi, Cardassian, Federation, Bajoran, Maquis, as well as races you've never even heard of. But I suppose, storyline-wise, it wouldn't have really necessary, because every ship that Voyager was going to encounter was more or less going to be an unknown, except for Borg vessels and maybe a few others that are advanced enough to get that far out. Generally, this is going to be an area of unknown anyway, so there's no need for that. But it was an interesting idea. If that, like I say, if that last episode about the Lynx was real, it does sound interesting, but it does also sound superficially very similar to the episode involving the Equinox and Voyager's encounter with that vessel. And even perhaps similarities to the episode to the encounter in the Cardassian Dreadnought. But, again, if anyone knows any sources in books or other media or other vessels that the Caretaker dragged to the Delta Quadrant, and he doesn't necessarily have to have left them there, because we know he sent most back, because it's even stated in dialogue. So it's implied in dialogue, should I say, that they're sent back by 7 of 9. But if you do know about any others, let me know in the comment section down below. That is, as I said, canonically, and for that matter, beta canon-wise, anything I can find about every ship that the Caretaker confirmed to have brought to the Delta Quadrant. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you made it all to this video, I thank you for watching. Bye-bye.